Welcome to OSM, peace be with you. This is Father John with my physical and spiritual update. The physical update, I had chemo a week ago today, so I'm feeling pretty good today. Had some rough days following the treatment, a little bit of stress in the last couple weeks, caused me to lose a little bit of weight, and a little bit concerned about that, but my numbers were good. My blood cells were good, platelets were good, so we went through the whole treatment. And then a week from today, of course, on the 24th, I'll have my next chemotherapy. Then on the 7th, I'll have my final one before the scan, which is going to be a CT scan on August 19th. That scan was to be a CT scan because the insurance didn't cover the PET scan for right now, so we'll get one of those down the road, but we'll take whatever scan we can to see what's happening. So I've been trying to do a little bit more physical therapy. My doctors feel I need to do that more often and on a regular basis in between treatments, so I'm working on that. Emotionally, it's rather stressful, as you can imagine, and just trying to fight through it, using the opportunities to rest as much as I can. So keep praying for me. So next Wednesday I will go for therapy again. I have no numbers to report. They didn't take numbers this time with the blood work, so a week from now I will be reporting to you, and we'll maybe see the numbers decreasing hopefully at that time. Descent to holiness is like climbing a ladder you call holiness, seeking perfection in your apostolic mission, only to find the ladder is against the wall of vainglory, and the view from the top is not one of perfection, but one far from Calvary, the hill of perfection. In my spiritual update today, I want to share with you what I've been seeking in prayer. And what I'm seeking in prayer is obviously a more intimate, interior experience of Christ crucified. And I've been reading this book here, The Way to Imperfection. It's an interesting title because there are many books that claim to teach you the way to perfection. In this book, it's very clear from the very beginning that we have an assumption that we ascend to holiness. But this book really focuses on the descent through the imperfections of who we are, because of concupiscence, our human nature, the fallen nature, for the temptations and for our own desires. Keep us from that perfection. This descent, that as I'm learning as I read this book, is the way to true perfection, because when we become and acknowledge our humanness, then we come to the place where we can be humbled, that we can seek God's grace and mercy and strength to help us to persevere. Of course, this descent to holiness, if you will, or to perfection, is taught to us by Christ Jesus himself. He descends from the right hand of the Father to take on flesh. He descends to be in appearance to those who see him only in his human nature, even though never separated from his divine nature. The descent was to count on mere human persons to be his apostles. And the descent, of course, continued to its very depth when he is laying on the ground being nailed to the cross. And then the first step to ascending to reveal himself in the perfection of his divine nature, finds him between the two thieves, to give forgiveness in paradise, and to profess from the cross his desire to forgive those who do not know what they are doing. This journey is one that is difficult to pursue because we are so inclined, if you will, by our good deeds and by our efforts and by our prayers to climb that ladder of ascent to perfection, to holiness. But just as the quote that I read to you at the beginning of this segment is really what I've learned. Descent to holiness is like climbing a ladder that you call holiness and seeking that perfection in your apostolic mission. But all along that ladder is against the wall of vainglory. It's against the wall of self-pride. And when you get to the top thinking that you're going to find the presence of God or the experience of that perfection and intimacy with the divine Trinity, you gaze over the wall and see how far away perfection is that exists on the hill of Calvary. Using this analogy then, every step back down this ladder against that wall of vainglory will allow you to descend to the place where you know perfection, because God's love and mercy is there. The other day I was doing the reading of the threefold confession of Peter's love for Jesus. When, after the resurrection, he meets them along the shore. And he asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And each one of those times calls to mind for Peter the threefold denial of even knowing Christ. And really that's what vainglory is. It's a focus on self that denies you working to feed the sheep of Jesus' flock. So all one has to do is begin that descent. And I'd like to just share with you a meditation on those threefold professions of faith of love to Jesus. First, descent is from our physical health. When I was physically strong, I had the appearance of health, and I was vain. I was proud of how I looked and how I felt. And I had this great assurance in self that if I only worked out and rode my bike and did these things, that I would stay on top of the physical life, allowing me to be an example of physical health to others. But these things were taken from me for my own good, to take me away from that vanity. But Jesus doesn't take these things away from me and leaves me abandoned. He asks me the question that he asks Peter. Brother John, without your physical health, do you love me? Without the self-assurance, do you love me? And I realized I had to answer, yes, Lord, I love you. You know that I love you. And he says, to feed my sheep, not from your self-assurance, but in my love and mercy as a shepherd. And then the second step down in the descent that I experienced was when I was preaching and teaching and leading and truly feeling the effects of being a shepherd of people. I was unaware at the same time of my ego and the vainglory that came with that preaching, with those teachings, and with those leading moments in my ministry. And recently, when those things were taken from me as well, my ability to preach, teach, and lead, in that descent, Jesus said to me, do you still love me? Can you love me without your vainglory? Can you love me not for how it makes you feel? Filled with the Spirit to teach, preach, and lead. And I said, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. And I'm learning to love you more than the vainglory that comes from those apostolic works, as they've been taken and put on the side, so that I can see my imperfections, my lack of wisdom, my inability to see you through me as the shepherd. And Jesus asked Peter a third time, do you love me? And that reminds me that now that I'm alone, when I celebrate sacred Mass by myself, do I love my priesthood just as much? And he says to me, you're a priest forever. And within your soul, do you love me? Where I can change you in your soul, ontological. An ontological change in baptism and again in the holy orders. Erase the 37 years. At that very moment, when you first became a priest, before you fell in love with the accolades and was revered as a shepherd, before your heart was filled with the love of your people, that moment in your soul, can you return to that alone? And do you love me? Is that enough, he asks me. Is it enough that I've changed you and made you my priest? And I says, yes, Lord. I do love you. Humbled, broken, and left alone. But you stand with me. Always. And remember how Jesus responds to Peter at the end. He says, when you were young, you did as you pleased, but when you get older, you will be taken and carried away. And in that moment, I will ask you for your life. I am so blessed that through this threefold descent, bringing me ever closer to the crucifixion, to share in the imperfection of my human life, won by the crucifixion and death of Jesus, I'm blessed. Climbing the ladder in the way of perfection, ascending to perfection, only to find out that the ladder was up against the wall of vainglory. And the hill of Calvary, where real perfection takes place, seems so far away. So all of us have to encounter these kinds of losses. If you're physically sick, if you're emotionally broken, if the life for which you were proud to be as a Christian is interrupted by some kind of persecution or change of way of life, when you do feel all alone, remember you were changed ontologically in baptism to become a child of Christ. And in that brokenness, in that perfection, He will ask you, do you love me? And you answer, yes, Lord, I love you. You know that I love you. That you are enough for me. So what should be our mission? Our mission should be not to examine our lives according to the way the world desires us to see ourselves. Not climbing to success, but descending to imperfection. To find ourselves physically, spiritually, and emotionally drained, so the blood of Christ from the cross can strengthen us. That He can hide us in His wounds. That He will hear our prayers. And He will permit us never to be alone. And if we meditate upon these things, then we will be true disciples of Christ. If you do these things, you'll find vainglory not something to strive for, but to descend away from. And I promise I will do the same.